symptoms of COVID, including breathing trouble, malaise, and brain fog. And Ghana became the first nation to receive vaccine shipments from the COVAX initiative designed to aid poor nations. We'll focus on vaccine equity later in the program. President Biden signed an executive order today to review supply chains for surgical masks, computer chips, and other critical goods. The signing ceremony followed a meeting with lawmakers on the problem. Mr. Biden voiced concerns about America's reliance on foreign manufacturers. The president's attempt to halt most immigrant deportations for 100 days is now on hold indefinitely. Late Tuesday, a federal judge in Texas barred enforcement of the moratorium. The state had claimed that the pause would violate federal law and cost the state more money. The same judge initially issued a temporary order against the moratorium. President Biden also faces growing questions about Neera Tanden's chances of leading the Office of Management and Budget. Two Senate panels abruptly postponed votes on the nomination today, but the White House dismissed questions about a possible replacement.
The stage we're in is working to continue to fight for her nomination, and as you know, it's a numbers game, right? It's a matter of getting one Republican to support her nomination. We're continuing to do that outreach, answer questions they have, and continue to reiterate the qualifications.
Key Republican moderates and one Democrat have come out against Tanden over her combative tweets. We'll look at her nomination fight after the news summary. The nominee for CIA Director William Burns says that the U.S. must confront what he calls predatory leadership in China. Burns is a former ambassador to Russia. He told his Senate confirmation hearing today that unlike the old Soviet Union, China has both technological and economic power.
The challenge posed by Xi Jinping's China, by an adversarial China, it's hard for me to see a more significant threat or challenge for the United States as far out as I can see into the 21st century than that one. It is the biggest geopolitical test that we face.
Burns also called for closing Chinese-backed cultural centers known as Confucius Institutes at U.S. universities. He charged that they are essentially propaganda tools. A former staffer for New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has escalated her accusation against him of sexual harassment. Lindsay Boylan posted online today that Cuomo kissed her, repeatedly touched her, and once joked that they should play strip poker. Cuomo's office said the claims are, quote, quite simply false. A federal grand jury in Minneapolis will hear testimony in the death of George Floyd in a renewed civil rights investigation. The New York Times and others report that a main focus is Derek Chauvin. He's the white former police officer who held Floyd down as he struggled to breathe. Chauvin already faces state murder charges. More than 80,000 victims of California wildfires sued former managers of Pacific Gas and Electric today for dereliction of duty. The utilities equipment ignited fires that killed more than 100 people and destroyed 25,000 homes in 2017 and 2018. The suit names nearly 24 former executives and board members. On Wall Street, bank stocks helped lift the broader market as interest rates rose. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 424 points to close at 31,961. The Nasdaq rose 132 points, and the S&P 500 added 44. And Fannie Fox, the stripper at the center of one of Washington's most infamous scandals, has died. Her affair with powerful Arkansas Congressman Wilbur Mills burst into public view in 1974 when police pulled their limousine and Fox leaped out of the car and into the Washington tidal basin. The incident ultimately ended Mills' career. Fannie Fox was 84 years old. Still to come on the News Hour, we speak to a key senator in the negotiations for a massive COVID relief bill. Outcry over global disparities revealed by the uneven distribution of COVID vaccines. The pandemic highlights discrimination faced by African Americans in the U.S. healthcare system, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
It is a busy week on Capitol Hill with a full slate of confirmation hearings on Biden nominees and a possible House vote on the COVID economic relief plan. Here with an update on it all is our congressional correspondent, Lisa Desjardins. So hello, Lisa. As the House now getting ready to vote on this big $1.9 trillion package, remind us what are the big items in this and what are the sticking points still?
That's right, the House of Representatives is set to vote on this on Friday, just a couple of days from now. And I want to remind people, this will affect most Americans if it gets through, as it looks like some parts of this will. Here's what's in the House bill. First, $1,400 direct payments to most Americans. Also, unemployment. Those on unemployment would get an added $400 per week. That's up from the $300 per week that is set to run out in March. Finally, for vaccines and testing, tens of billions of dollars, over $70 billion to help manufacture vaccines, get them out, and also to test Americans and kind of really try and have the first full-throated effort at contact tracing throughout this country. So it is a vigorous, huge bill. But another issue in this bill that we're watching closely this week, of course, is the fight about the minimum wage. Democrats would like to some Democrats double the minimum wage to $15 per hour. And right now, that is in this House coronavirus relief measure. But the fate of that probably rests with the Senate. I'll tell you, here's what's going to happen. There is a single person who will make this decision because Democrats in the Senate want to use a 50-vote process called budget reconciliation. And that's a way to get around the filibuster that requires 60 votes. But in order to use that process, the Senate parliamentarian of all people will decide if the minimum wage hike actually qualifies. Well, what's the criteria here? The key issue, Judy, is whether or not the minimum wage hike directly affects the budget. Does it change revenues? Does it add to costs? Therefore, will it qualify? And today, this morning, Democrats and Republicans held a rare behind closed doors meeting, staffers each making their case, almost law and order style, to the Senate parliamentarian, whose name is Elizabeth McDonough. She herself is now deciding what she will do. And the entire Congress is waiting on her decision to see if the minimum wage hike has a good shot in the Senate or not.
A lot riding on that. And meantime, Lisa, we know the president also very focused on getting his nominees for the cabinet through, almost halfway through with the confirmation process. Remind us where all that stands right now.
So far, President Biden has gotten, let me look at the right numbers, 9 of his cabinet level nominees have been confirmed, but there's another 14 still waiting to go through. Some of them, like Merrick Garland for the Attorney General spot, look like they're on a glide path. And even tonight, an energy nominee also passed a key procedural vote in the Senate easily. But as you reported earlier, there is one that seems to be having the most trouble. That is Neera Tanden, who has been nominated for the Office of Management and Budget because of her partisan and sharp tweets. Right now, there is a Democrat, Joe Manchin, who says he will not support her. That means they need a Republican to get on board. All eyes on Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. One other note, Deb Haaland, up for Interior Secretary, also is someone there are some doubts about. However, Joe Manchin, the key senator again in the Neera Tanden fight, has said he supports her. So it looks like the Deb Haaland nomination is on a better path than Neera Tanden's. But as you reported, President Biden is not backing down from either one.
And you are watching every bit of it. Lisa Desjardins, thank you so much. And with the Senate evenly split, 50-50, moderate senators have become key to getting the president's COVID bill passed and his cabinet nominees approved. A short time ago, I spoke with one of those lawmakers. He's Democrat Jon Tester of Montana. Senator Jon Tester, welcome back to the NewsHour. Let's start by asking you about President Biden's COVID economic relief plan. It looks as if pretty much all the Republicans are opposed. What do you think needs to be done to it to make sure that all 50 Democrats in the Senate are on board?
Well, look, I think the Democrats are on board with the package. I think there's some modifications that can be made to the $1.9 trillion package in terms of accountability. But in the end, I think this package is needed. It's needed to get vaccines in people's arms. It's needed to help businesses that have really been hit hard by this pandemic. It's important for the working folks who can't find their job. And it's important for education because distance learning and in-person learning at the same time, which is happening in many places in this country, costs a lot of money. So I think the package is a good package. I think it's a needed package. Chairman Powell, head of the Federal Reserve, was in front of banking yesterday and talked about the fact that we needed this to push the economy forward. So I think we're going to get all Democrats. I think if the changes are made, it's probably going to be around accountability. And I certainly don't have any problem with that.
You've said, Senator, in the past that you think the aid should be more targeted toward people at the lower end of the income scale. Is it sufficiently targeted now?
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think after talking to the experts, I think it's fine. I think moving forward, I think there is a possibility we could come out of this economic downturn that we're in now in really good fashion because I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. And so just moving forward, I think we ought to keep that in mind. We certainly need the package now. Maybe in 6 months we need to take another look and see if the money's still being spent in a wise fashion. But in the end, I think that those dollars going to those working families, I think they're really important. And hopefully we can give them the support they need.
And Senator, another part of the plan that's getting a lot of attention, of course, is the president's proposal to raise the minimum wage, federal wage, $15 an hour. You've said that you think this needs to be modified by states, by regions. What do you think the minimum wage should be?
Well, look, I supported a minimum wage increase in the past, and I think that the debate we're going to have on the minimum wage, if it ends up in the package, by the way, and we still don't know if the parliamentarian is going to say it passed the bird bath or not, but if it ends up, let's say it ends up in the package, well then I think we need to figure out how it's going to be implemented and in what manner. I think, my opinion is this impacts small businesses in a very big way. They've been impacted by the coronavirus and the pandemic in a very big way. So I think the minimum wage needs to come up, but I think we need to extend it out a ways before it hits the $15 figure. How long that time frame is going to be up for debate, and I look forward to having that debate.
Is there an amount you have in mind where it should start? I mean, a base level?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm pretty flexible and I'm pretty workable on this, but 10, 11 bucks an hour at a base level and then moving from there would seem to be reasonable for me.
And it sounds like you're a hard no on $15 an hour.
Well, I don't think it's going to be $15 an hour implemented tomorrow, even if it is in the bill. I think that there will be plenty of debate on how this gets implemented moving forward. I think there is some merit to bringing the minimum wage up. I think we've just got to be careful so we don't put our small businesses in a bad situation. And, Montana's a small business state. We need to make sure that our small businesses continue to grow and move forward. But we also need to make sure that folks are getting a fair wage for the work that they perform. And that's really the crux of it all, walking that line, trying to find the sweet spot so both can happen.
Senator, I also want to ask you about President Biden's nominees for his cabinet. Most of them seem to be moving through smoothly. A few, though, are running into opposition, in particular the nominee to run the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden. You said you know her, you support her, but as you know, Republicans are they're saying they don't like the nomination. Even a Democrat is saying he won't vote for her. The Republican argument that she's been too partisan, too negative in her tweets. What do you make of that argument? Some people say Republicans are being hypocritical because of what went down the last few years.
Well, I think it's a double standard. There are plenty of nominees from the Trump administration that I supported that, quite frankly, said a lot of really bad things. And if you're going to use that as your reason not to confirm people, I think it's important to try to stay consistent and think back of what you did with some of the nominees that President Trump put forth. And I'm going to tell you, I worked with Neera Tanden, and I think she is a good person. She speaks her mind. I kind of like that. I like to know where people stand, and I hope she gets confirmed because I think she deserves to be confirmed. I think she's a talented lady that will do a marvelous job at OMB, and hopefully some people will change their minds and will get her confirmed.
But at this point, do you think she will be confirmed? I mean, how concerned should the White House be?
Well, I think they should be concerned, and I think they should be trying to work this nomination as much as they can.
One other question, Senator, and that is Republicans in the Senate, their willingness to work with this new president. How would you characterize that right now? Do you think he has the right approach to working with them?
Well, look, Joe Biden is a creature of the United States Senate. I like Joe a lot, and I think Joe's going to reach his hand out across the aisle as much as he possibly can. Joe also knows that this country has some things that have to be done. That's why he put forth the $1.9 trillion package. And I applaud him for his leadership. And he's been there since he was sworn in on the 20th of January. And he is going to try to get folks to work with him. In the end, he understands that we've got to get some things done, and we'll do what we need to do to get things done. In the end, it's going to have to work out for the country, and I think Joe's priorities are right. But just as with everybody, Judy, we're going to be giving him input, constructive criticism when we don't agree, and try to move in a direction that works for both the state I'm from, Montana, and the country as a whole.
Senator John Tester of Montana, very good to see you again. Thank you so much.
Judy, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Who gets the vaccine and when are not only serious questions in the U.S., but also around the globe. A group of rich countries is buying up billions of doses. But as Nick Schifrin reports, the United Nations is stepping into the breach with its own plan to increase vaccine equity.
On a tarmac in Western Africa, Ghanaians welcome a European vaccine delivered by an airline manufactured in India, sponsored by the United Nations. That global effort is the UN's COVAX program, and Anne-Claire Dufay is UNICEF's Ghana representative.
This is really a historic moment. Today, we're very happy to receive the first batch of COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility.
The 600,000 doses of AstraZeneca vaccine is the beginning of what the UN calls the largest procurement, distribution, and supply operation in world history. It's designed to deliver 1.3 billion vaccines this year to more than 90 low and middle-income countries. Vaccine equity has been a global call. From South Africa, which has recorded half the continent's deaths, President Cyril Ramaphosa.
We are all not safe if some countries are vaccinating their people and other countries are not vaccinating.
To Mexico, which last week received the Pfizer vaccine, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
These are things that we want to see at the UN, that there be equity.
The UN says residents in just 10 countries have received 80% of the world's shots. Europe has ordered 2.5 billion doses for 500 million residents. COVAX is hampered by limited supply and logistical challenges. The UN calls that a, quote, catastrophic moral failure. Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
The latest moral outrage is the failure to ensure equity in vaccination efforts.
But countries ahead of the curve are pursuing vaccine diplomacy. Israel has vaccinated a higher percentage of its population than any country. And now Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who visited a gym on Sunday, promises to share excess vaccine with partners in the region and world. Russia launched an English-language campaign, V for Victory, or V for Sputnik V vaccine.
Sputnik V is the first registered vaccine against COVID-19 in the world.
The largest effort comes from China, whose state television broadcasts deliveries of Chinese vaccines all over the world. In the U.S., last week, President Biden pledged $4 billion to help COVAX.
Competition must not lock out cooperation on issues that affect us all.
For more on this, we turn to Dr. Naheed Bidalia, the medical director of the Special Pathogens Unit at Boston Medical Center and an associate professor of infectious diseases at Boston University School of Medicine. She also served as a clinician during the Ebola outbreaks in West and East Africa in 2014 and 2015. Dr. Bidalia, welcome to the NewsHour. How important is it that vaccine distribution is equitable globally?
Hi there, Nick. It's critical, and it's not just critical because it's the right thing to do, because, you have now a setup where a majority of the world, or parts of the world that may not get this vaccine for years. And what you see is that with a protracted pandemic, you can't recover the economy, and you continue to lose the gains that have been made in health indicators and education indicators. This is all related. The longer you see turmoil, and not only that, but you have entire countries that have not vaccinated any of their healthcare workers, and yet, as you see losses of healthcare workers, that might affect health indicators in other ways as well. But there's selfish reasons to do this as well. One is the variants. We're seeing now that these variants, with increased transmission of this disease anywhere in the world, you're going to see new variants appear, and that's why that equity is important for us as well as for others.
Western countries have bought more vaccines than they have people, but there is still a supply shortage. There's still a lot of pressure in individual countries on governments to vaccinate their own people, of course. How quickly should Western governments be releasing supply?
Well, I think the big part of this is every country is going to have to make a decision, but I would say as soon as we can. Last week's dedication, the commitment that President Biden made was important because it also then made further commitments possible from European Union and others. But money is actually not the only issue, right? Because what the Director General of the WHO has said is that it's just the availability of the vaccines. And so part of this is going to be tied to how quickly the richer countries can make manufacturing capacity grow, not just for their own constituents, but also for the global community. I think we should be donating a portion personally as we go along, because this will help ensure that the resilience remains in the rest of the world, and it protects us from those variants, as I said.
Part of the question of that supply, of course, is the newer vaccines. Just today, Johnson & Johnson got pretty good marks from the FDA, and it does not need the ultra-cold storage that we've seen previous vaccines need. How important is it that new vaccines come along to try and solve that supply problem?
Well, the big good news about Johnson & Johnson is not just the fact that it can handle, refrigeration at normal rates versus the Pfizer vaccine, which currently requires ultra-freezing temperatures, which may change because they've submitted new data to FDA for warmer temperatures. But it's also that it's one dose, and it can actually reduce risk for death and hospitalization to 100% after 28 days. And so it's both the dosing, but also because in many resource-limited settings, maintaining that cold chain to get to the last mile is going to be important. So absolutely important. We have candidates that do that now, that AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, and we're hoping potentially Novavax as well.
At the end of our story, we noted the vaccine diplomacy, vaccine nationalism that we're seeing out of Russia and China. On Russia, more than 24 countries have signed up for Sputnik V, but Russia's struggling with creating enough supply and vaccinating its own people. Are there countries that are over-promising distribution of vaccine and under-delivering?
Well, currently, I think it's a little too early to tell. I think part of this will be how not only how much can be sent, but how much can be actually timely distributed in those resource-limited countries. The thing that worries me in some of these setups of more well-resourced countries distributing vaccines is that we need to ensure that it's not tied to other commitments, right? I think in all global health diplomacy, you kind of have this give and take, but one would hope that in these settings, particularly in a public health emergency where vaccinating everybody is important, that sort of secondary gains and political commitments are not part of the game that occurs.
Dr. Nidhi, very much.
Thank you.
Inequities around the world clearly also exist here. Black Americans have faced discrimination and even abuse by medical professionals throughout our country's history. And in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, these problems have only been magnified. First, we hear from Americans who directly experienced medical discrimination. And then Yanish Alcindor speaks with a doctor who has studied this painful legacy.
So about 10 years ago, when I was in college, I just
started fainting pretty regularly. And the very first doctor I saw kind of ignored everything that I said because she wanted to focus on an STD panel. And she was convinced that I had tertiary syphilis at the age of 22. I said, don't you have to have that for like 10 years before that would happen? And she said, yeah. I was like, well, I wasn't having sex when I was 12. She refused to believe me. She refused to believe that at that point in my life I only had one partner, and she just was adamant. Would not look at any other options. And then at some point in time, I just stopped going to the doctor, and I dealt with not knowing what was wrong with me 2 years ago. I was at work, like I couldn't make sentences, I couldn't read. I got rushed to the hospital, they thought I was having a stroke. And it was only then that they determined that I have complex migraines, which mimic other things.
I had my gallbladder removed. I noticed after I left the hospital, I was in a lot more pain than I thought I should be in. By the 5th day, I was not able to keep any food down. I had a fever. It was about 103. I reached out to the surgery team. He was just so dismissive. He wouldn't run any tests. I came home and emailed my doctor. She made an appointment at a hospital, so they did the proper blood work and everything and determined that I was septic. The doctor told me once I made it to the hospital, like you couldn't have survived another night like that.
I had to get a laparoscopic procedure. I remember sitting in the bathroom and feeling like something was falling out. What I saw like protruding, I was like terrified. So we went to the ER. The supervising doctor was able to remove it. It was like a curved metal thing. And the resident comes down and it's a young white girl. She was just, as a matter of fact, like, oh, don't worry, it was sterile when we put it in. There was no regard for, hey, that was put in on Thursday and it's not meant to stay there. A couple of days later, I'm still feeling pain and I call the doctor's office. The doctor calls back and she goes, well, I don't want to give you any more opioids because I don't want you to develop a habit. Huh? I don't know, I just felt like it was disrespectful, it was dismissive.
I felt that it had a lot to do with me being a Black woman, and I just wasn't in a position to really advocate for myself at that time. I was sick, I was barely standing up.
I know 100% that the treatment that I would have gotten, the dismissiveness of my symptoms and my health history and not believing me would not have happened had I not been a woman of color.
I think race, sometimes is a roadblock for some people where they're not able to feel empathy. I would have felt better if she had a reaction, to it, and asked me how I was doing.
I have a 7-year-old who I've taken him. We had a very severe medical issue and we were repeatedly ignored over and over and over and over again. And it took me bringing his white father to repeat what I've been saying for the 3 previous appointments for them to take it seriously.
I've been so terrified of getting sick because I don't want to end up needing a doctor, needing to go into a hospital. Like the thought of it gives me so much anxiety. If I end up there again, there's no way that I'm gonna survive. Like I got lucky this time.
My dad got really, really sick from COVID and he was in the ICU for 10 days. And for me, there was a fear because, at this point, nobody's able to go in and I can't advocate for my dad. I don't know what his experience is. So it is a fear of how are they going to treat him? You don't want to have to, if you're ever that sick, to put your life in the hands of somebody who might not even care about your life.
As we just heard, there's a deep distrust for the medical community among many African Americans. For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Vanessa Northington Gamble. She's a professor at George Washington University and a historian of American medicine. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Gamble. What is the danger in focusing too much on the distrust of Black people for the medical healthcare system than rather focusing on the untrustworthiness of the system?
I think the problem is with this focus on the distrust of African Americans, it becomes like this inherent trait of African Americans, that these distrustful Black people, as opposed to focusing on a healthcare system that does not have trustworthiness. So what has the healthcare system done to engender the trust of African Americans? And by talking about trustworthiness, it puts the onus on the medical care system to change.
And there's been a history of the medical system not treating African Americans equally. How has that trauma been passed down by generations of African Americans?
I think the trauma has been passed down by family stories and family history. One of the major historical events that people talk about is the United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee. But it's not the only history. And so I think families pass down the stories maybe of the syphilis study, but it might be how their grandmother was treated in the hospital, how their aunt was treated by a physician. The relationship of the African American community with the medical and public health communities did not begin or end with the syphilis study. There has been hundreds of years of mistreatment of African Americans